The myriad components of collectivism combine to form a comprehensive system for transforming the individual into a cog within the machinery of the state. The first step is to remove self-reliance, thus creating dependence on the state or collective. The next step is to create a motivation based on fear of scarcity, as opposed to creativity and productivity. Remove the systems of autonomy, creativity, and self-teaching, which help create individuality in the first place, and the void is filled by the will of the collective. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the mind is no different. Innovative and enigmatic German philosopher of the 19th century, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, observed that human history could be manipulated to create a contrived outcome. Hegel's essential observations of the methods by which history may be authored by a small group translate into a world in which an individual's choices may be engineered away from his needs.
How to engineer the opinion of the American people so that they would fully endorse, not only endorse, but demand a war.
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Oh my gosh, another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion.
So it's problem, the people then beg for it, that's reaction, and then it's solution, which is centralizing more control.
Create the problem, people scream, you couldn't impose any solution you want on people.
One recent practical example of the use of Hegel's method for control is that of the infamous underwear bomber.
I'm Kurt Haskell. I'm a Michigan attorney, and I'm more well known as being the main eyewitness to the underwear bomber event on Christmas Day 2009. I saw two men approach the desk. One looked like a poor African man, or maybe late teenager, and one looked like a wealthier Indian-looking man who had on a tan suit. They were walking together, and I just thought they were a weird pair, and I was wondering why the two were together, and I listened to their conversation as they went up to the desk and talked to the airline worker. When they went up there, just the Indian man spoke, and he said, this man needs to get on the flight, but he doesn't have a passport. And then the airline worker said, well, he can't get on the flight without a passport. And then the Indian man kind of argued with her, saying, well, he's from Sudan, and we do this all the time.
The student from Nigeria smuggled explosives onto a flight in his underwear. Prosecutors staged a demonstration of what might have happened, but something went wrong. Abdul Muttalab's trousers burst into flames. Passengers and crew grabbed him. The plane landed safely.
A source has confirmed that Farouk Muttalab is the son of Alhaji Muttalab, former chairman of one of Nigeria's biggest, wealthiest and most respected banks, First Bank of Nigeria.
As soon as this happens, we see Mr. Chertoff all over the news and TV everywhere promoting these body scanning machines.
But there are a few things we could do to make things better. First, we could deploy the scanning machines that we currently are beginning to deploy in the U.S. that would give us the ability to see what someone has concealed underneath their clothing.
To meet agendas in conflict with the needs of individuals, the ruling class creates an artificial crisis to which the public reacts by begging for the ruling class to intervene. The ruling class then enjoys the plunder made possible by removing the self-reliance from individuals.
Good morning, everybody. Today's hearing is the third in a series of subcommittee hearings focused on some of the causes and consequences of the 2008 financial crisis, a man-made economic assault on our country that is still foreclosing on homes, shuttering businesses, and driving unemployment.
The combined philosophies of Thomas Malthus, Charles Darwin, and Herbert Spencer led to the development of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism grafted the concept of the survival of the fittest onto the larger social framework. claims of biological advantages or superiority could then be advanced as justification for future economic policy relating to the poor, and as the basis of Francis Galton's pseudoscience of eugenics in the 20th century.
So Darwin comes along about 150 years ago and comes out with his theories on where life comes from, and then it's survival of the fittest, and that the best organisms are able to survive in a competitive environment and move forward in the evolutionary chain. And whether that theory is correct or partially correct or totally wrong is a side issue. The robber barons, the British royalty, the J.P. Morgans of the world publicly adopted the idea of Darwinism and merged it with predatory eugenics.
And the eugenicists, who have always been looking for scientific causes to justify their sinning, if you will, that's what they found so useful in Darwin's work, is they said, we've already had this belief system that we're better than you, but we now have science to back it up.
Our entire current civilization, what we know as globalism, the New World Order, is based on eugenics scientists that developed their theories in the last 200 years, mainly in England, Germany, and the United States. The entire science of genetics, biometrics, eugenics, computers, all of it came out of the search for a system of total control over humanity.
So the issue with eugenics is it claims to be a science of self-adaptation for human species. So it sounds like a great thing if you're an individual. You want to make yourself better. If you reproduce, you want your kids to be strong and survive. However, the people who are doing it are taking and making a bunch of decisions for other people and violating volition and their free will all over the place because that's their modus operandi.
In his 1928 book, The Open Conspiracy, former British psychological warfare expert H.G. Wells wrote, "The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing governments. The character of the open conspiracy will then be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion. This large, loose, assimilatory mass of groups and societies will definitely and obviously attempt to swallow up the entire population of the world and become a new human community. The immediate task before all people, a planned world state, is appearing as 1,000 points of light, but generations of propaganda and education may have to precede it."
The government of England put massive funding towards the study of humans, and not just medicine, but human behavior. And so all the sciences that the British Empire used on countries that it was attacking and regions it was conquering were also turned inward against their own populations.
In 1948, Eric Blair, the British journalist and author who assumed the nom de plume of George Orwell, wrote the iconic dystopian novel 1984. In it, Orwell outlined a collectivist future governed by technocrats, in which a Big Brother totalitarian state maintains control of society through constant panopticon-inspired surveillance, fueled by a perpetual war and emboldened by both covert and overt forms of mind control and mass persuasion.
The premise of the panopticon, it was an architectural design that was set up to maximize the power of surveillance. So if the prisoners didn't know, they could never tell if they were actually being watched at any one time, so they would have to assume that they were always being watched.
Through 1984, Orwell introduced the concept of newspeak into popular culture, a debased language structure that would suppress the ability of the masses to upset the power of the state by regulating their thoughts through an illusory police force known as the thought police. Orwell's notion of doublespeak demonstrated the cognitive dissonance inherent in tyrannical structures. As the meanings of the words change, the meaning in society is lost.
And fortunately, we have been able to raise our standard of living without sacrificing the spiritual side of life, which means so much to the American family.
Thomas Henry Huxley, the man known as Darwin's bulldog, produced a number of grandchildren the two best known and most influential being Julian and Aldous Huxley. Sir Julian Huxley, an evolutionary biologist, was elected as the first Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and also served as both Vice President and President of the British Eugenics Society.
So the Huxley family is highly interesting because T.H. Huxley is the teacher over H.G. Wells who becomes a famous protege. But Huxley's whole family is not only intermarried and working on these eugenics ideas themselves, but they have, he has a famous son and grandson and all sorts of famous cousins that tie into the Darwin-Wedgwood family. So notably, you have Aldous Huxley, who coins the phrase Brave New World in 1932 with his novel, which is really describing a technocratic future by which people are pharmaceutically drugged into loving their servitude.
I think what is going to happen in the future is the dictators will find, as the old saying goes, that you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. That if you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the ruled. And this they will do, partly by drugs, as I foresaw in Brave New World, partly by these new techniques of propaganda. They will do it by bypassing the sort of rational side of man and appealing to his subconscious and his deeper emotions and his physiology even, and so making him actually love his slavery. I mean, I think this is the danger, that actually people may be in some ways happy under the new regime, but they will be happy in a situation where they oughtn't to be happy.
Leveraging the fact that the 20th century opened up numerous avenues for shaping and controlling the thoughts and behaviors of the population, the ruling elite contrived new ways of obscuring useful facts while peddling useless ideas to the American people. Advertising, in addition to fundamental changes in education, produced a population of non-thinkers whose false understanding of basic concepts instilled through public schooling led to generations of people who feel they are magically endowed with the ability to somehow attain knowledge without first observing the landscape of available, credible evidence. One such artifact of credible evidence which demonstrates that our lives are being scripted by the ruling class is a 1966 textbook authored by Georgetown professor Dr. Carroll Quigley, titled Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. In it, Quigley details a secret society, partially funded by central banker Lord Rothschild, enacted by Cecil Rhodes and led by Lord Alfred Milner, and the Round Table Journal of International Affairs, which Quigley terms the Milner Group. The first questions most people ask upon hearing of such a book are, why is it so important, and why do so few know about its existence?
This is a key book. It's almost like the Rosetta Stone to decode everything they're doing. It's over 1,000 pages long with incredible, documentation in the bibliography of how this ruling elite based out of Britain is using a full spectrum dominance model to fund the communists, to fund the fascists, to fund the Democrats, to fund the Republicans, so that there looks like there's a choice, but everything really is moving towards collectivism for the general public, while the elite themselves are exempt from all their own rules.
These are the ideas of people who plunder that care not about laws or boundaries or nations or your rights. They see might makes right. And so when Cecil Rhodes goes in and creates Rhodesia, you have South Africa and the De Beers whole cartel of diamonds and gold. And then you look at who Cecil Rhodes left his will to, who funded him to go down there and do that. You keep coming back to the historical central bankers that have been manipulating world events as we've been taught them for at least since the beginning of our country. 1776, 1790 is when they start to gain a foothold. They then come over in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, pre-Civil War, gain a stronger foothold. And by the end of the Civil War, we're completely switched over to a system that we had fought 60 years before to overthrow.
Once the power structure got all the best and brightest students of the world and put them through Rhodes Scholar type programs, not just in England, but in other nations, they could then control the brain trust and have a fully programmed new generation to take control of the governmental, corporate, and media systems to carry out the program.
Their goal was to dominate all of those major power centers quietly behind the scenes. And by moving the leadership in a certain direction, then they knew that they could control the masses without the masses even knowing that they're being dominated and led by a very small, powerful elite group.
In further pursuit of the science of controlling human resources, the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes spawned the Pilgrim Society in both America and England, which created a global brain trust. Its goal? To assert global control by dividing its tasks into working groups, such as the Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, and Trilateral Commission throughout the 20th century. In more recent history, the long-held beliefs of the ruling class regarding control of the individual's body by the undermining of his mental abilities were then furthered by the technological breakthroughs of the 19th and 20th centuries. In the 19th century, the Prussian government conducted research into the study of how to make individuals compliant cogs in the machine of their conflict-based empire. Prussian psychologist Wilhelm Wundt determined that the individual human being has no soul and can thus be programmed like an automaton or robot.
You see, the social engineers don't need us under social Darwinism. We're scum to be removed. We are seen as nothing but biological androids or replicants from the Philip K. Dick book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, turned into Blade Runner. We're just seen as dumbed down biological workers.
When individual identity has been forsaken, it is much easier to compartmentalize the minds of those being controlled. Various personages throughout history have described the human being as a machine, but it was the synergy amongst the work of Wilhelm Wundt, Ivan Pavlov, and many others, which scientifically quantified the individual as soulless, thus justifying manipulation to plunder individuals of their rights, transforming individuals into human resources.
Our system is copied from a 1819 Prussian system that's a three-tiered education system. One tier is for the intellectual elite. The second tier is for the servers of the intellectual elite. They would be the professionals, the doctors, the lawyers. And the last tier is for the lay. It's for the masses.
Education, as we know it, is nothing more than mind control. It is the science of control. And the British scientists, the eugenicists, came up with systems to dumb people down and make them submissive. But the German model, in fact, namely the Prussian model, that was designed to create soldiers that were owned by the state, but that were so brainwashed they were proud to go off and march into musket fire. That system, known as kindergarten, is the whole basis of modern Western education.
How do you measure the achievement of a nation?
If you want to know how we're really doing, take a look at our schools. For on what we're doing here and in schools throughout the world rests not only our future fate, but perhaps the very fate of civilization itself.
Building upon this dehumanization of individuals to the animal state of stimulus response, Russian researcher Ivan Pavlov and American researcher John B. Watson conducted experiments based on classical conditioning, a simple manipulation of reflexes under observable conditions. These methods were then improved and perfected by Harvard psychologist B.F. Skinner.
B.F. Skinner was also one of these famous American behaviorists, and he championed something called operant conditioning. Again, just a fancy jargon term for some basic common sense. And operant conditioning was really all about negative reinforcements like timeouts, positive reinforcements like food pellets and money, and punishments, which are like punishment, shocks. This operant conditioning doesn't work so good on anti-authoritarians, people who challenge and resist authority. And later on, research has shown that operant conditioning works best on people who are dependent, infantilized, in other words, made like children.
When you ask yourself, as a teacher, as I have at the college level, what have I got that my students want? It's sometimes a pretty discouraging question. But you can discover things which will be reinforcing to students at any level. And that has been done. A great deal of progress has been made. There are things in an ordinary, even say a ghetto classroom, the lower grades or high school, that can be used as reinforcers. You can have special foods at lunchtime, access to play space, privileges to associate with other kids of your choice. More and more of these things have been brought into play as the kinds of contrived reinforcers that can be used temporarily to get the kinds of behavior which will then eventually have their own natural consequences, which will be reinforcing.
One of the notable things that separates human beings from other inhabitants of this planet that we call animals is our ability to form questions. And that allows us to remove ourselves from certain types of control. Now, animals are subject to many of the same sort of stimuli that can train and condition them to. Skinner that appears to know how to read and respond to lexicons. So it gives the appearance that the pigeon can read or that the fleas are trained, but really all you're doing is, reinforcing a random schedule of conditioning, taking natural characteristics and harnessing them. So what you see in the 20th century, not only with the eugenics crowd and all these other things that we've talked about, what you see is they go after the root cause of humanity. The root cause of humanity is that we've learned to, speak amongst ourselves, and we've learned to observe reality, remove contradictions, and get to that which exists. When somebody obscures that feedback loop between you observing and testing it out and verifying it, when someone obscures that, they can take total control of your awareness.
These methods of classical conditioning had advocates in other fields equally or more influential. Soon, the field of compulsory education would teem with the ideas first spelled by these social engineers.
These children are being taught to accept uncritically whatever they're told. Questions are not encouraged.
How can you ask such a question? Have you got a textbook?
Yes, ma'am.
Does it say here that our law courts are always just?
Yes, ma'am.
Then how dare you question the fact? Sit down.
And so we aren't surprised when...
But it must be true. I saw it in this book right here.
The education our children are going to get has nothing to do with education. It is training our children to be resources, human resources, that's the way they refer to us, to spin off profits for the globalists.
The greatest barrier to discovery is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge, and that's what the 15,000 hours in compulsory schooling really entrains and conditions into us, is that you've been told this story of the people in South America, and so you think you know about it. And it's not until later in life when you might come across more information about conquistadors and how Jesuits infiltrated all the religious systems and took all the riches out and basically harvested this whole area. This is an example of plunder in South America that went on for hundreds of years. So until you have this other piece of information to bring this into focus, you think that what you were taught in public schooling during that 15,000 hours is really what's going on. And it's not until you bump up against reality, as George Orwell said, usually on a battlefield, that you have to consider that which you were taught to believe versus the objective evidence that exists.
John Taylor Gatto was an award-winning educator in New York who took kids that couldn't even read or write, were headed for prison, and made them top-level students. And then he discovered that he was shut down by the big tax-free foundations so that he couldn't teach the children this information. And he discovered that it was by design that they were dumbing people down to make them subservient biological androids or replicants. That's what we're seen as. But now we're obsolete. We're to be phased down the new robotic systems, the drone aircraft, the drone submarines, the drone ships, the drone robots on the ground. We're all being conditioned, all being acclimated for this.
In The Underground History of American Education, John Taylor Gatto details how, beginning in the early 19th century, American travelers abroad were writing on the methodology of Prussian schools and composing travelers' reports, which were very influential on educational techniques in the United States. However, in 1831, it was French philosopher and Minister of Education Victor Cousin who published his Report on the State of Public Instruction in Prussia, which not only led to the consolidation of French schools under the Prussian model, but also directly influenced reformers like Horace Mann in the United States to follow suit. Mann traveled to Prussia and, without even seeing one classroom in session, sought to adopt the Prussian model of education with his annual reports given to the Massachusetts State Board of Education. Mann's promotion of the concept that the state is the father of children was reinforced and expanded by educational reformers throughout the 19th and 20th century.
When we speak about enculturated processes, when we talk about the imprinting, of course, I mentioned educators. One of the things that surprises a lot of people, and it shouldn't because it's publicly known, is that our education system is not about educating as much as it is about socializing. Like the duckling in the chicken yard. If you take that duckling and raise it with the chickens, it's going to be imprinted, it's going to behave like the chickens. And in that very real sense, we perpetuate this. The danger is we don't just perpetuate it, we don't just enculturate it, but it's the only sane way we see to raise our children. And the result is there's no escaping it.
C.S. Lewis said, when training, which is Skinner, Pavlov, beats education, civilization dies.
Secure your copy today at Infowars.com. Again, you're watching InfoWars Nightly News and the premiere of State of Mind. I want to remind all the viewers that it is essential that we support independent, pro-liberty film, a Veritas-type film. You can buy State of Mind on DVD or on Blu-ray at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139. Again, that's 888-253-3139. Or again, simply becoming a subscriber to PrisonPlanet.tv. We'll also have it archived here on the site. But it is so important that you vote with your dollars. The globalists take your money and give it as stimulus to MSNBC to put out anti-family, anti-self-defense, pro-tyranny messages. Same thing goes on with National Public Radio. We're not funded by that. We're funded by patriots who love freedom worldwide like you. So I want to thank everyone that is a PrisonPlanet.tv subscriber. We have Operation Awaken the Sleeping Giant, one membership, $5.95 a month. 11 people can log on with the same username and passcode. And I want to encourage you all to go to InfoWarsStore.com and get your copy on DVD or Blu-ray so you also have that in your library, in your archive. And again, most filmmakers I have on, most filmmakers who I sell their film, do not authorize us to, A, premiere it here on the show in the Nightly News, but B, put it on YouTube. But they have authorized us to put this whole discussion in the film tonight on YouTube because they want to reach people. That's the currency they're looking for, is to free minds, to empower people. That's civilization. Slave-based systems want to keep people in the dark. And going back to Richard Grove, the writer, and Austin Green, one of the producers on this, I just don't get, we talked about this on the radio last time you were on, using knowledge to suppress people when my great thrill is empowering them. It is the ultimate in selfishness. Then I want to talk about what are the methods of conditioning and dumbing down in the classroom.
Well, what you're talking about as far as dumbing down is taking thinking out of in between stimulus and response, which makes us automatons. It makes us slaves in every way, shape, and form.
Slaves to stimulus.
Absolutely. And in between stimulus and response, it's that space that gives you choice and freedom and liberty and all the things that we need. But because we as conscious human beings have to use reason to survive. We have to effectively plan for the future, and we have to know what knowledge looks like in order to dismiss the arbitrary and find the lies.
But I mean, dumb that down for me. Okay, because, and for folks that may not know these terms, stimulus is you ring the bell, the dog salivates because you've given him the meat over and over again. And their big lie, we don't have free will. Well, wait, they want to take over. They have free will. It's a mind game that you're just our slaves.
It's a ploy. They condition human beings through operant conditioning much the same as they can train pigeons to look like they're reading and pecking at words because it's a reward. But that's only a human being when they're not thinking. If you question the psychological warfare, if you question the neurolinguistic programming, if you question the corporate media that you see on TV and all over the newspapers and all around you in your life, in your family's life, then you can free yourself from the system. So the damage done in the 15,000 hours in the classroom through Prussian education and the servile mentality.
Look at the camera right there and tell them what Prussian education is.
Prussian education. Prussia, before it was Germany in the late 1860s, it was called Prussia, and it was a bunch of different city-states that were all kind of at war. And finally, they got together through militarizing and using force, fraud, and aggression to attain their goals. And this was working really well until Napoleon, Napoleon had defeated the Prussian army at the Battle of Jena in 1806. And from that, the Prussian government and people like Karl von Clausewitz, who wrote on war, they went out and decided, hey, we can't have people on the battlefield who will run away from weapons and won't fight for their country. We need to nationalize their mentality. We need to break the individuality and the sovereignty of those individuals. We need to make them submit through force, fraud, and coercion. Compulsory schooling was the model that they made successful, and it later resulted in the Nazis.
That's right. Our modern educational system is a German military brainwashing program on record. Kindergarten, all of it. People go, well, I just grew up in this. Well, let me tell you, it's the opposite of freedom. And nothing against Germans, I'm part German. The point is it was a technology corrupt people used to take over the Germans. It's like the global model is a British Empire model. I'm part English. I'm not against the British people. They always spin that too. Like if you're like, I don't like what the communist Chinese are doing. What, you don't like Chinese people? You know, I don't like what Hitler did. What, you don't like Germans? Again, that's operant conditioning. Don't be racist. Just to get you, people out there watching off of the real info. Don't like government-run healthcare? You're a racist. Don't want to turn your guns in? You're a racist. That's that conditioning, that buzzword again.
You're observing this phenomenon that goes on, and it's prevalent, so we should give it a name. This idea that you got your finger on it, it's the philosophic corruption of our reality. It's the fact that people don't value truth anymore. They say they do, but they won't go through the work to actually realize it and do the learning, which results from asking questions.
Austin?
I think that the conditioning was summed up in the film best by B.F. Skinner. You know, he talks about there's certain things that you can do to manipulate your students to get a particular behavior response out of them. And then once you do that enough, once you repeat that over and over again, eventually those behaviors become self-reinforcing. Like we were saying earlier, we all police ourselves. And so really, they don't have to continually do this. All they have to do is get you up until about 4th grade. They've got you so trained at that point that once you enter into high school, you're doing it on your own. And so really, we just see that repetition of taking away your individuality. Anytime somebody in school tries to speak an original thought or question what the teacher has to say, they're immediately punished. They're immediately chastised, and this happens over and over and over again.
And it's this worship of authority where they've done, as you know, 2 different, covered in the film, university experiments, where people would kill people under orders because an authority figure told them. I mean, if an authority figure told me to mow their lawn, I'd tell them no. They tell university students, kill that person, and they'll do it. I mean, this is incredible.
Well, there's 2 aspects. There's an MK Ultra aspect where you could train someone to actually kill and eat their parents. And then there's the everyday advertising war that we're all exposed to through any magazine or newspaper or television ad that we see on TV. So all these things come, you know, it's like a coincidentia oppositorum. You have scientific management coming through MK Ultra from top down in intelligence agencies, and you have war coming in from the marketing companies, and they make a very happy living off of the unwitting servitude.
There's layers and layers of the programming. It's just incredible, meant to just overwhelm you till you just give up.
And this is a great tool to peel off those layers, 1 layer at a time, as you learn how to.
And the fun is, once you know the programming, you learn the cop doesn't know what they're doing. They're programmed too. The bureaucrat doesn't know, and they like short circuit when you know the programming and they don't. But instead of using that programming to enslave them, you use it to unlock their mind.
The fundamental choice that human beings have is to think or not to think. So we all have the ability to think. If you choose not to ask the questions, if you choose to be servile and you want to give away other people's rights that you don't have the right to do, that's fine. You can do that, but expect other people to resist, the people who are aware of how things work and how logic and reason should be, advanced in this world.
That's right. Just because
suppressed.
you've been put through dog training at the TSA to be a slave, prisoner training, doesn't mean I'm going to go along with it. And I notice with these sheep, sometimes they get mad when I wake people up about what's happening, and then later they go, no, I agree with you. It's like once they see me not bow to their peer pressure, they have like mass Stockholm syndrome. Then they grovel to me, and I go, no, I don't want you to be my prisoner. I don't want my kids growing up in a world with a bunch of slaves. Stop acting like that. It's pathetic. Let's go back to more of State of Mind, premiering the whole film here tonight with extras coming up.